However, despite the steps taken by the previous Commission towards undertaking comprehensive electoral boundary reviews, the process encountered serious constraints, which I believe you are aware of some of them. These constraints materially affected the pace and the timely completion of the boundary delimitation exercise. And as you are aware, we have already exceeded the constitutional timelines, which requires us to undertake the boundary delimitation between 8 to 12 years. So the last review was to be completed by March 2024, and those timelines have since passed. So we have outlined some of the constraints that have affected the boundary review process, and that's where we are. Absence of commissioners, as you are aware, after the previous commission left office in 2023 January, the IBC remained without commissioners from that moment up to 11th July 2025, when these new commissioners assumed office, which is barely 6 months ago. And therefore, in the absence of commissioners, the Secretariat alone had to pause some of those activities that required policy decisions and oversight by commissioners. For example, the boundary review operations plan that I've spoken about required the Commission to relook and to review, and in the absence of the commissioners, that policy paper could not have been extended. And of course, there were other activities that required policy directives. So that was one of the main constraints to the timely review of the boundaries, electoral boundaries. Number two, we also had a hurdle in the form of judicial invalidation of the census data of 2019. So there are active cases that have affected the validity of the census data for 14 out of 17 constituencies in the 3 counties of Garissa, Wajir, and Mandera. On the 28th January 2025, the High Court in Garissa, in petition number 4 of 2020, in Sheikh and others versus Kenya National Bureau of Standards and IBC, invalidated the 2019 Kenya Population and Housing Census data for the 3 counties, finding that the census process failed to meet the requisite legal and procedural standards. The Court of Appeal subsequently directed that the matter be maintained in status quo pending the determination of the Civil Appeal number 236 of 2025. So the matter is in the Court of Appeal, and therefore this rendered the affected census data unusable for official purposes by government agencies such as IBC. So the 2019 data cannot be used by IBC insofar as that case, that directive of the court is concerned. The Commission needs that data. It needs a valid and legally binding Kenya Housing and Population Census report for it to use that report and that data in determining what is called the population quota. As you are aware, we have 290 constituencies, we have 1,450 wards. And for us to determine the population quota currently, we need that data for us to work with. So for us to publish the preliminary report, because the boundary review process requires that we publish a preliminary report and a notice of intention to delimit electoral boundaries, that data is very, very critical. So until the courts resolve that issue of that population census report and the litigation around that is resolved, we can therefore not use that data for the discharge of our mandate. and therefore our work to that extent will remain hindered. Another issue that has affected the boundary delimitation process is, of course, exposure to legal risks in boundary reviews. The Commission continues to face litigation arising from the delays to conduct and complete the boundary review and delimitation exercise. As you are aware, as late as last year, 2025, the Commission has been sued by a section of Kenyans demanding for orders to compel the Commission to undertake the boundary delimitation ahead of the August 2027 general election. And therefore, we are saying this continued litigation poses a risk to our work, and depending on the outcome of the cases now and that might be filed in future, it is a risk that we as the Commission are aware of and are alive to. Fourth, the advisory opinion of the Supreme Court. Last year, before we assumed office, the Supreme Court rendered its advisory opinion in this matter and directed that the Commission must apply its mind on this issue and must make a decision on which way forward. And the timeline, of course, it took for us to receive that advisory opinion, and the uncertainty around the constitutional issues and timelines, and the absence of commissioners, as I've said before, and the pronouncement that the Secretariat alone could not, in the absence of commissioners, undertake any boundary reviews. Those are some of the risks, so those are some of the factors that impacted negatively on the comprehensive delimitation of the boundaries.